Hello everyone. Using a bit of a different video format here today. Someone submitted some test results and had a question about those, and I thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun just to use a different media option here? It's a little PowerPoint presentation, and figured it would be more visually entertaining than just watching me prattle on, so we can look at the screen instead. So as per usual, nothing that I'm saying should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. If you need medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. And even though I'm looking at somebody's specific lab results that were sent in, I'm not directly interpreting them or providing them with any medical advice. So just going to kind of speak generally about this and hopefully give some insight based on the question that is posted here. So cut and pasted it there so I didn't have to toggle between multiple devices. So just reading it out loud in case somebody's just listening to this in the background. So it says, the question was, can you tell me what's the difference between the blood and urine? I'm not understanding fully on reading these results. The metals are showing in urine, but in range, but we don't want any to show right. However, the suggestion on this ZRT lab, ZRT is the name of this lab that does different tests, including this one, typically at home blood spot or urine test. Their lab is basically saying to not do anything, and unhappy emoji face. I hear you. I have an unhappy emoji face too, and I am confused here. So again, I can't give any direct advice about these test results, but I feel like I can share some information that would be relevant and useful. So the one part of the question here, saying, the metals are showing in, let's see here, the metals are showing in urine in range, but we don't want any to show. So at the end of the day, I've done, I can't tell you how many, like hundreds, if not into the, well over 1,000 heavy metal test panels before, and a lot of baseline tests so baseline tests, post-provocation tests, and retests over the course of time. I've never seen a urine heavy metal test that's come up showing zeros across the board for common metals. For uncommon metals, like the ZRT lab, which I think is a fine lab. I don't use them personally. We use doctors' data, not financially affiliated with any lab, just that's the lab that we happen to use. They have a more comprehensive panel of metals, and so there's certain like really rare ones like palladium and cesium and uranium, different ones that like folks oftentimes will have levels of zero for those like really weird uncommon metals. But say for something like lead or mercury, like I've never ever seen a zero for lead or mercury. That well, there's maybe a couple of times the folks like have really clogged up detox pathways. If we actually see essentially a zero for mercury or lead, like I'm thinking like, what's going on here? Why is this person not excreting metal? Because unfortunately, we're all exposed to heavy metal in our environment from some of the poor decisions that our forebears have made. And so in terms of like, do we not want to see any metals? Like, no, we expect to see metals. We want the levels to be very low. We want them to be below a certain cutoff range, because if they're higher than that, it does suggest that there's excessive ongoing exposure. If a person was eating, say, way too much canned tuna, which is, high in mercury, then their urine levels and perhaps even their blood levels eventually would show an elevation. Just a general comment that generally it's not really realistic to expect all metals to be at a zero. Maybe they're really obscure ones, but more common ones, lead, cadmium, aluminum, arsenic, mercury, if I didn't say that one, those are ones that we're generally not going to see zeros, but we do want to see them being nice and low. And then just the question here at the start, what's the difference between blood and urine? And we can see from these results, so there's the mercury level in the blood at the top there, first category is the blood spot. So mercury, it's at a certain level and it looks like it's in their reference range in the green zone. We also see it in the urine. It's like, okay, so what's the difference between blood mercury rather, and urine mercury? And again, not specifically speaking to these test results, but like, what is the general difference? The general difference is that blood and urine can both be used to assess for whether there's like an actual excessive mercury exposure happening. And the gold standard for mercury poisoning, mercury toxicity, if you will, would be elevated blood mercury. If you have elevated mercury, if a person has elevated mercury in their blood, like that's really bad news. Like you could be developing some, major neurological symptoms, major fatigue, like major serious issues. A person could have elevated mercury in their urine, indicating, okay, they're being exposed to too much mercury on a daily basis. Maybe they're eating too much tuna, or they're working in a coal mine, or they have a leaky amalgam filling in their mouth, or something like that, or they've been playing with too much. They're a dentist and they're putting in too many mercury amalgams into people's mouths, which is arguably like a terrible idea to put mercury in the person's mouth. But so like they could be getting way too much mercury exposure, or they could be getting too much mercury exposure, and it will come up in the blood. But if it's not actually coming up in the if they're getting too much mercury exposure and it's coming up in the urine, but it's not coming up in the blood, it tells us that, okay, the person's not actually at a toxic level of mercury, but there's definitely more exposure than there should be, and toxicity could be around the corner, or along a gradual bioaccumulation in the tissues could be building up. So it's trying to think of a good analogy here. I guess a good analogy would be, if somebody, walked up to you and said like, "Hey, would you like me to inject a bunch of like fat into your arteries?" You'd be like, "That sounds like a really bad idea because that's going to kill me, probably instantly." But if a person said, "Okay, well instead, you can just eat, say a really suboptimal diet, shall we say, and that ultimately builds up like a lot of, plaque accumulation, cholesterol buildup in the arteries, like, well, that could gradually increase over time. So they're both still going to be deadly, but one's kind of deadly, very quickly, and the other one is going to, increase the risk of mortality, over the course of time. So kind of similarly, if there's elevated mercury in the blood, that's really dangerous and something that really needs to be remedied ASAP. Elevated mercury in the urine would be more of a clue that like, okay, there's probably this gradual accumulation in the system, and that could very well cause major issues over the course of time, but not quite as acutely dangerous as the elevated level in the blood. So that's kind of the main difference between blood and urine in this case, where the blood is kind of a more alarming if it's definitely alarming if it's elevated. Elevation in urine is definitely something to pay attention to, but not as kind of acutely dangerous. The one thing that I will, so hopefully I gave some good insight on these questions here. If there's any further questions about these results, feel free to post in the comment section below. I'm happy to talk about them further. Again, not specifically giving advice, but just about them academically, so to speak. The one thing I will mention here, and I mentioned it in other videos, if you're interested in the topic of heavy metals, please consider searching searching my YouTube channel. It's easy to search those, or scrolling through my litany of Instagram videos or Twitter videos or wherever you happen to watch my videos. And there's other other videos on the heavy metal topic. But the one thing I mentioned in probably all of those videos, and I'll just mention it one more time, is that we, from a just blood spot test or a just unprovoked urine test, we do get insight into current exposure levels to heavy metals, but it doesn't tell us anything about or doesn't really, virtually tells us nothing about the whether there's any bioaccumulation of metals over time. So that weird analogy I used about, injecting fat right into the bloodstream versus, gradually building up plaques over time in the vessels. This test is kind of telling us like, oh, does it look like there's, well, actually, no, I guess the analogy kind of falls apart there. Essentially, this test doesn't tell us at all whether or not there's a gradual buildup of metals in the system. It's only telling us really about exposure levels in the relatively recent past. So I'm doing a provoked metal test, having a test like this as a baseline, then for a provoked test, administering a chelating agent, collecting another urine sample. That's what would tell us if there's actually a buildup in the tissues. But again, posted about that before, so I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for submitting the question. I appreciate you, giving me permission to post a video with your results, the image of the results here, because I think it just adds more flavor to the video and lets people kind of get more of that visual sense of what we're talking about. So I will leave it there for now, and thanks for your attention.